Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu ba'asok b'divrei Torah. So we are we're going on with the story of Avraham and his arguing to save the city of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Tzvoim, those 5 cities that were considered wicked cities. There are midrashim that describe, in fact, perhaps I'll share a couple of midrashim that are actually quite poignant about the nature of their wickedness. So one, I believe, is that they would perform crimes that were very, very small. In other words, they'd steal small amounts or cheat people from very small amounts of money at a time, and they were too small to take to the courts because they were like for pennies or cents or things like that. So that was one kind of thing. So there was never any justice executed because the amounts they stole were so small. So that's one way they avoided having to execute justice. Another story that gives one pause is that well, for one, we know that they were the antithesis of Abraham and Sarah, that the quality of Abraham and Sarah that we associate with them is the quality of chesed, of kindness, and part of that kindness being hospitality to strangers. And the people of Sodom, as you will see, maybe not this year, but at some point, or if you care to read on, you'll see that they did not like strangers. And if somebody came in and was poor and would ask one of them for money, they would say to them, well, I gave to the United Way already, so don't ask me for money. So they would not actually help each other. And that was sort of a lack of kindness being demonstrated. And then the midrash, that's a very painful midrash, is the fact that they didn't respect individuality. So they used to say if a stranger would come, that they had this bed that was exactly a certain length. And if a stranger came to the city and the stranger was longer than the dimension of the bed, they would cut his legs. And if he was too short, they would stretch him to fit the size of the bed. I mean, clearly it's not necessarily to be taken literally, but I think the idea of trying to force people to fit a particular mold and not to tolerate individual differences, I think is the point of that story. And of course, these stories are still relevant in terms of how people get treated nowadays. You think about our attitude towards people who immigrate to this country or who try to come into this country, and various other qualities that go on. And unfortunately, these are human qualities. And you've probably heard me say already that one of the major purposes of the Torah is to overcome impulses, to be able to be master of our own impulses. And clearly they were not that way. So with that, I will start sharing the screen and we'll continue with the text itself. But those are famous midrashim.
Well, I mean, Sodom was, divinely punished
Yes.
in a severe way, but what you're describing, as you say, is still happens, and it's still, it's not just bigoted attitude towards immigrants. It's parents being narcissistic and controlling their own children because they don't understand or accept differences. And it's just like, what's the difference? And I'll take my parents as an example because they were very much that way, and they weren't interested in the Torah or religion. So what's the difference between them and these people? I mean, why were they all divinely punished for these human, not good, but human impulses that they didn't treat or work on or understand?
Right. No. I think part of the idea is that again, if we look at this as literature, it's there to give us a warning and to try to help us make the changes that we need to make and to understand that. And of course, there are degrees and of the degrees of wickedness that went on in Sodom and Gomorrah and those 5 cities. But again, I think the idea of reading this material is to try to train us and help us overcome these particular things, to be aware that the Torah is not out of date at all. In fact, the more one thinks it's out of date, the more problematic it is, because the less likely you're to address these very, very basic kinds of things. So we'll go on. But no, Lauren, I hear you loud and clear. And part of that is, we say so many times, we talk about God's chesed, ki l'olam chesdo, for his kindness endures forever. And part of that kindness is the tolerance that that God has for human behavior and our lack of appreciation and lack of response. And it's not like a personal, God isn't a person. We need to take into account that in some ways it's our relationship, as I've said many times, as I've tried to understand this, to the whole universe, that we have a relationship to the universe. And we were reading just recently in the book Between God and Man that Heschel makes the point that so often we're involved in what is God doing for me? And there's a balanced question that the Bible tries to give us, which is, what are we doing for God? What does God expect of us? And how do we respond to those expectations? So just a very profound question. Okay, continuing, verse 31. So we're still in this conversation that Abraham is having with God. Vayomer, this is Abraham speaking. Hine na no ho'alti ledaber el Adonai. He says, behold, I've begun to speak to my Lord, or I've had the presumptuousness of speaking to my Lord. Ulai yimatzun sham isrim. Perhaps 20 will be found there. So we're down to 2 cities, right? Vayomer, God says to him, Lo ashchit ba'avur ha'isrim. He says, I won't destroy on account of the 20. So ho'alti. So Rashi explains this word ho'alti, which, as you could see, I was trying to find the right words to translate it. And the way he says to translate ho'alti, ratziti, which means I desired to. Kamo vayoel Moshe. There's a part where Moses is in Midian, and it says Moses was willing or was desired to remain with Jethro and his family, or it pleased Moses. So it's hard to just translate it simply as Ratziti, I wanted or I desired. It really definitely has some of the connotations that I was trying to put into the translation I was giving you. And goes on, Abraham's not finished. Vayomer, he said, Al na yichar ladonai. He says, may my Lord not be angered. Please, may my Lord, please, that's the na, please not be angered. Va'adabra achapam, and I'll speak only once more. Ulai yimatzun sham asara. Perhaps there'll be found 10 righteous people amongst all these people. Vayomer lo ashchit, and God says to him, I won't destroy it. Ba'avur hatzara, on account of the 10.
Rabbi, why do they just keep saying Vayomer? And you have to know which is Abraham and which is God, but they never say Vayomer Abraham, Vayomer Elohim. They just keep saying Vayomer no matter who it is.
Right. I think it's, and there are times when we will record a conversation and the context is clear enough that we don't need to actually state the subject, that the subject can be understood. And I think that's the sense here. that
Because I would think that they would actually want to differentiate when it's God and not God.
right. So apparently it's, the Torah doesn't feel that it's necessary. And you know, there may be other connotations that you're suggesting, Lauren, to the fact that it doesn't mention Abraham and God and Abraham and God. It would become very repetitious. And I think the Torah does try to be economical as to how this is going on. But it's very clear who's saying what, because Abraham's the one who's pleading and bargaining, and God is the one who's saying, I won't destroy. So it
Yeah,
wouldn't
it's just
make sense to think that it was Abraham who was saying, I won't destroy.
right, but it's just nobody would ever write. But he said, 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 he
Oh,
said.
okay. So I think the reason why is because we don't have quotation marks in Hebrew. So the
No,
vaYera
that's not
quotation
what I'm referring to. I'm not referring to whether it's in quotation marks or not. I'm just referring to the fact that it just keeps saying he, and it just repeats it. And
Mhm.
generally, when people are trying to be clear and understood, and they're writing something, at a certain point, they would re-interject the names,
Mhm. Well,
not just back and forth he. That's just very strange. And I was wondering, it just seems like economy can't be the reason, but
it may not be a sufficient reason. I think that, but I think, I'm willing to say that there are stylistic issues going on here, and because it's so clear as to who's saying what, that what you might do as an exercise is to translate this into English and not put down he said and just use quotation marks. In other words, the actual speeches themselves, and to see how that looks on a page, starting a new line every time it was someone else, between Abraham and God. And
yeah.
you see sort of this back and forth that's going on here between.
The next couple of them actually, Abraham is
Yeah, it was
saying,
right.
yeah, we'll get to it, and it'll be much easier to identify who's speaking
Right.
in those. But I can, yeah.
It's
And
not
and
that I
you're
can't,
dealing with it as a grammatical and a literary thing, and
yeah, it's not that
I
it
know.
can't be identified. It's just really strange to just keep repeating that without
Yeah.
asserting, the speaker's name. And I just wondered if there was a reason for doing it in such a strange manner.
Yeah. So again, it may have to do with, how used you are to this particular style, and whether it is strange. But I think it would be interesting if there were some point made about the fact that their names aren't mentioned here, and that there might be some additional message. By the way, I want to go back to a conversation we had yesterday about the minyan, etc. And that how I explained that it had to do with the definition of the word Adah, which means congregation. And I told you what the context of what that was, which was the 10 spies that Moses sent, the 12 spies that Moses sent in to reconnoiter the land of Israel, and how 10 of them, spoke negatively. Shira Beth, I see that you'd like to say something, please.
Um, I finally learned how to do that, how to put the hand up.
Good.
Lauren, I was just thinking that, at least for me, without the names and with just the word vayomer, it gives to me it gives a more intimate feeling. It's like I'm there listening to these two people talking to each other, and the narrator whose voice is in the Vayomer Avraham, Vayomer Hashem, that narrator's voice is quieter, and the two voices of the two people speaking are louder, because the narrator doesn't have as much to say. It's just like me and them, and I'm listening directly to them. That's how it feels to
Oh,
me.
that's very good.
Yeah, it is. Thanks, Shira Beth. That's lovely, really. So I was going to say that, I gave further thought to the point that you made, Lauren, about the 10 righteous people. And while I honestly have to say that in my limited experience and studies, I've never seen this, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah and the 10 righteous people, and the fact that there had to be at least 10 of them, quoted as part of the minyan and things like that. It's not to say that it doesn't exist somewhere. It's just interesting that it's, certainly, at least from what I think I can say, is it's not really out there. But nevertheless, it's so hard to resist the idea that if you have at least 10 people, praying every day in a minyan, and one of the things that I've noticed about our prayers is the degree to which not only do they express praise to God and supplication and asking for forgiveness, etc., and thanksgiving. They also have a lot of values that, basic human values that are expressed through these particular prayers that have to do with character and stuff like that. And just the idea that 3 times a day there's a representation of the community, which is allowed to be 10 people to maintain the righteousness, that righteous balance that this story is talking about. And it's pretty amazing when you think about how many thousands of people quite possibly lived in these 5 cities, and it's down, at least 10 could save a city. So let me get into the Rashi here, and here we go. Ulai mimatzun sham asara. Perhaps 10 will be found there. Al pachot lo bikesh. So he says, one could ask the question, well, why didn't Abraham ask for less, right? So here we go. So why didn't he supplicate God regarding fewer than 10? Amar, he thought to himself, this is Abraham figuring this out himself. Dor hamabul hayu chet, right? When you look at the generation of the flood, so now you're talking about the entire generation, right, of the flood. Chet, there were 8 righteous people. Noah uvanav, Noah and his 3 sons, so that's 4. Unishehem and their wives, that's another 4 people. So there were 8 people there, velo itzilu al doram, but they did not rescue, right? They did not, they weren't able to save their generation. Al tet, and if in fact we allow for 9 al yedei siruf, and one could understand that regarding that the first number past 50 that Abraham asked. Remember, he goes from 50 to 45, and we figure there that we're saying 9 plus God, right? So that's the tziruf that I believe he's talking about here, right? Kvar bikesh, right? He said Abraham's already asked about that, velo matzah, and it didn't work out. So that's why he stops at 10, and because 8 weren't enough and 9 weren't enough with the generation of the flood. So it's interesting, though, of course, I'm sure many of you know about the Lamed Vavniks, right? That there are 36 righteous people that on the basis of which God saves the entire world. And here we're sort of talking about 10, although it's 10 to save a city and not the entire world. But nevertheless, I think there's this encouragement that the Torah is trying to give us to recognize that there is such significance in the attempt to try to live a life of righteousness, that it's such a powerful justification of the world at large, and just makes up for how many people don't act in a righteous way. So
Because you could always say, well, I'm sure there's 36 out there, so why do I have to be?
maybe, but maybe they aren't. Maybe they're 35, and it's up to you to be the 36th, right? You can't say it for sure. Judith.
Um, I I don't know. So many of us are saying, the significance of 10 in terms of a minion.
Yes.
And I didn't know where the 10 for a minion comes from. I thought this was a really good place, and it's a really good time to talk about it because Abraham is challenging God. You
Yes.
know, should not the God of justice do justice?
Right.
And and also the way the whole story of Sodom and Gomorrah is used um, to say this is about homosexuality.
Mhm.
And so to, I don't know, tell the story of Sodom and Gomorrah in terms of uh, Abraham, the recognizing an aspect of God, that God would do justice, and raising that question. And our discussion in the last couple of days has brought up the power of righteous people, that it that doing the right thing really counts.
Right.
Though I noticed that Safaria
Mm.
translates it as innocence,
Hmm.
as for the sake of the innocent. Um,
Hmm. Yeah.
but
So, sorry to interrupt you just for 1 second, Judith, and
yeah,
I don't want to lose your
sure.
point. Just to tell you that in general, Safaria is it's not just one or two people who have noticed that Safaria's translations are not necessarily reliable. So that's all I want to say. I don't want to get into any more because I'm interrupting you, but I just
Uh-huh.
want to make that as a little, footnote there. So go ahead, please.
Okay. Um, so, and I really, when I'm working with kids, so I really do not want to get into okay, take my daughter uh part of it.
Hmm.
I But I really don't want to skip the story of Sodom and Gomorrah,
Yes.
because they're going to encounter it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and I don't, we need to bring in the Midrashim, we need to bring in rabbinic interpretation, things like this, because if you just go from
Hmm.
reading the text and without the Rashi translation
Yes.
there, um, we can see how many sidetracks we go down, and how much um, our our current thinking misses so much.
Yes.
So it's really good to have Rashi there, but I really would like to understand um, how this doesn't connect up with a minion, or maybe is it just happenstance that it's 10, or we come up with 10 because we have 10 fingers.
Oh, well, I'm sure there are all kinds of connections as to hands being what we do, right? That hands have to do with control and that kind of thing, and 10 fingers, and that it's no coincidence that there are 10 commandments and 10 fingers. Um, so what you're reminding is there, I think it may still be in publication. There is this is an educational for a religious school. It was something that I liked very much. It's called the Rabbi's Bible. And they're like 3 volumes. I think one is for the Torah and one is for the prophets, and possibly they have one for the writings. But it contains a lot of midrashim. It's not overdone. It's selections, and if you can get your hands on it, it's, as I said, it's called the Rabbi's Bible, and I think you might find it just meets the needs that you have in providing midrashim, because some of these midrashim that I mentioned are mentioned there. There's also a companion volume for teachers, which supplements all that as well. And I think it's a very responsible book that can be used in class and that can satisfy, what you're looking for. The other, I may have a copy, Judith, if you'd like to see it. I'll look and see if I have one in my library, and you can take a look at it if you like.
I
Okay,
would really like that. Thank you very much.
sure, sure. Okay, so we have, let's go on here. We did, right. So we're on to verse 33. And let's see. Vayelech Hashem, that God went, Kasher Kila Ledaber El Avraham, when he finished speaking to Abraham. Avraham shav lemakomo, and Abraham returned to his place. So we know that this whole conversation, I just want to remind you, started off, who is the one who really initiated this conversation? And that is God. And it's beautiful if you think about it, because of course, God is anticipating that Abraham is going to do this. In other words, that he wants Abraham, God wants Abraham to do exactly what Abraham did. And in a way, it's a test, right? God is testing Abraham to see if he'll speak up on behalf of these wicked people, and to say, well, but there could be some righteous people. And I think another takeaway from me is that so often, we just subsume righteous people amongst a group of people who maybe we consider, and maybe for justifiable reasons, consider to be wicked, and don't take into account the fact that, we have to balance the individuals and to recognize that there may well be individuals who really are righteous, etc. And especially when we're talking about classes of people like Palestinians, or any group that, or when people talk about Jews, and there are Jews that are not righteous at all, and yet there are also Jews who are incredibly righteous, and likewise any group, Palestinians, etc. And that could be also something buried in this, from looking at this from a literary point of view. Let's take a look at the Rashi, and we'll have to end with that this morning. Vayelech Hashem, etc. Right? That God went. Kevan shenishtatek hasenigor. This is actually very sweet. It says, when the defense attorney concluded. Nishtatek literally means from sheket, to be silent. When the defense attorney was silent, halach lo hadayan, the judge left. The judge left the conversation. For Avraham shav lemakomo, and likewise on that side, we have the balance of Abraham returning to his place. Nistalek hadayan, when the judge leaves, nistalek hasanigor, then the defense attorney also leaves. For hatigor, and now we have the katigor, means the prosecuting attorney. Katigor mekatreg, that's the verb, right? And the prosecuting attorney now is left to prosecute. And for this reason, this is amazing, right? He's now quoting the Torah that's going to follow this passage, and it says, and the two angels, the two angels, Sodoma to Sodoma lahashchit, in order to destroy. Because remember, Abraham's visited by three angels, right? And now we only talk about two angels. So why two angels? Achat lahashchit, one angel was to destroy the cities, et Sodom, and to destroy Sodom, and of course we mean by that all the cities. Ve'echad lahatzil et Lot, and one angel to rescue Lot, rescue Lot. Vahu oto sheba the rapot et Abraham, and this is the same angel that came to heal Abraham. Vahashlishi, and the third angel that's no longer around, sheba levaser et Sarah, that angel came to announce to Sarah that she was going to become pregnant and bear a son. Kevan she'asas lichuto, so he had finished doing that back when they visited Abraham. Nistalek lo, he also left and went his way. So let's go in here, and with God's help, next year we'll pick up the story with a new chapter. And so I'm going to mark that here. And if anyone wants to comment before I stop the recording, but that's where we'll stop next year, God willing, as I said. stop the share and we'll stop the recording.